Hello, and welcome to another episode of Unbottleneck, the podcast where we solve common digital marketing problems. And we have an amazing guest with us today. And this is a guest I met at a conference recently who just blew my mind. She walks into a room where we're in this middle of a conference session. The speaker stops to announce that this person came in and how amazing she is. And everybody she just absorbed all the attention of the room from that point on. Welcome to the show, Louisa Frahm from the LA Times, a senior SEO editor of LA Times. Thanks for being on the show today.
Hi, I am so excited to be here with you, Steve. Thank you for having me.
Likewise. So I heard some pretty amazing things about your history. So from what I understand, before you joined the Times, which was right around 2019 or so, you sharpened a lot of your editorial skills at People Magazine, Entertainment Weekly, TMZ, Yahoo, and E Entertainment. Just some small companies, not anything that you know. You grew up in San Diego, graduated from the University of Colorado at Boulder in 2012.
Go Buffs.
Um, right on. And when you're not learning the ins and outs of Google, like all of us SEO geeks do, you're pursuing your insatiable passion for pop culture, which I
Absolutely.
I saw firsthand when we were at the conference in Napa. A baby boomer in a millennial body, she's convinced her soul was born in 1949. Ask her about Prince, Freddie Mercury, and her extensive Funko Pop collection.
Yes.
Um, that's amazing. I think we were talking a little bit before the show about how my daughter's also huge on Funko Pop. Where did this stem from? Do you have like relatives that it got ingrained in you driving in the back of a car, or where did this you know baby boomer stuck in a millennial's body start?
Yeah. So I love that you asked about it. I feel like my grandma finds ways to creep into every single thing that I'm doing. And it always really warms my heart because, she passed away a few years ago, but I
Sorry.
always find little reminders of her. And that's really where I think it did start. Is that, from a very, very young age, my grandma was my best friend. And it didn't matter that there was a giant, age gap between us. We just really bonded like at heart and soul. And so she taught me from a very young age. It's so funny. During my lunch break today, I was like scrolling through like the Clark Gable hashtag on Instagram and just seeing what was on there. Like, this is literally what I do. And I think it all goes back to my grandma. A really cool story about her is that she was born in 1920. And I also think I got my love of pop culture from her because she used to tell me back in those days when she was a teenager that you would send out for photos of your favorite stars. So this would be, she loved Clark Gable. She loved Katharine Hepburn. She loved these like classic Hollywood stars. And so you would send out for like a photo from them and they would autograph it and send it back to you. I
Okay.
was so bummed that I never found those. I'm sure they were somewhere. But I really think my love of all things older than me and also just being very drawn to people who are older than me started with her because she and I just were best friends. It wasn't like a typical sort of, grandparent, grandchild relationship.
Sure.
And so I grew up with her. And then in addition to that, being around my mom, we were really like the three amigos. And my mom from a very, early age, she's a lobbyist and she would take me to a lot of events where you had to get very comfortable right away speaking with people who are much older than you and, kind of like going around, not being afraid to chat with people you didn't know. So that made me very comfortable with that also from a young age. And yeah, just through like a kind of a variety of those things. And we all love movies. They really taught me to love like movies and music. The musicians you mentioned are totally a result of my mom. And in addition to that, my grandma taught me to love, like Dean Martin and, that sort of era as well. So it's really, the strong woman in my life that planted that seed. And we were, such a tight trio. And my mom and I always like to say that we remain that way because grandma is always the empty seat at the table, that's how we always refer to it.
Right.
And I carry that like very proudly. It's definitely what us Froms are known for is like our love of entertainment and, kind of cherishing these, past beloved things and knowing that they're always
There's,
with you.
there's definitely a thing about nostalgia that puts you back in a time that has um, fewer technology, burdens
Yeah.
and habits that they didn't have, where character and personality and depth of who you were more important than social status and the number of followers you have, or whether you're important enough to be able to monetize your social media profiles. It's such a different era that we live in today. So
Absolutely. I mean, I feel that deeply. And I think, like, I've reflected being a child who was born in like 1990. I was kind of right at the very end where I still got some childhood that wasn't at all impacted by social media. I think the first thing I got was like Facebook in high school. But those really were different times where, you didn't have to be on your phone every 5 seconds. And yeah, those sorts of thoughts didn't always filter through of like, should I post this? Like, and having that sort of presence, it was definitely more, like freeing in a way, to not have to be on that all the time. But at the same time, to kind of get back to like our SEO theme that we have for today,
mhm.
I always crack up that I'm very much split down the middle because I'm this like super old soul. Like I am very old like on the inside, but I
But
also
you're
work
you're
in
living
SEO
on the
where
the
it's like all
forefront
digital.
of digital. Yeah, that's the amazing part. You've got probably one of the most challenging jobs working for one of the largest newspapers in the world,
Yeah,
and you balance your time between that volunteer work and trying to have a little bit of free time in between everything. So I can definitely empathize with that. With the adjunct teaching I'm doing, and trying to run the
amazing.
agency, but
Yeah,
not nearly the level of responsibility you must have. Speaking of which, I'm sure it
yeah,
got a little bit scary when some of the updates started rolling out a few months ago, and one of them had to do with news feeds and AMP and all this accelerated mobile page stuff. I'd love to jump into that and talk a little
yeah.
bit about how that's impacted news in general, and if you've seen anything change in terms of click through rates without the AMP icon. Love to talk a little bit about that update. Have you learned anything or seen anything so far? What's the scoop?
Sure. Yeah. So that is something that I was aware of just right away involving like industry blogs and things like that. That's something that I always want to be on top of, just, because we have so many great SEO colleagues out there who love to fire off those updates on like Twitter. And I'm always trying to stay on top of those sorts of things. So I've been aware that this sort of thing was coming for a while. I would say just so far, I've been monitoring it pretty closely to see if there is any sort of like noticeable dip in our performance that would be very different from like our other competitors who are in the publishing space, and people that we kind of consider ourselves to be like right on par with. I
Mhm.
haven't seen anything super alarming yet, but it's something that I'm always staying on top of. The AMP thing is interesting because I can say that like now a while ago when AMP was a big priority and it was like
Yep.
publishers should have it. I mean, I remember
You,
when
you
that
had to
was
have it to
going
get
on.
into Google
Yeah.
News. Yeah.
Yeah, you had to have it. So seeing the evolution of that and the fact that, now it's like totally shifted, that is interesting to me. And I want to see if that continues to, kind of have a bigger impact. But I think what I would say at this point, just from like monitoring our traffic and our performance on a regular basis, is that I've been paying close attention to the types of sites that have been hit by it and have been affected. And I haven't yet knock on wood, seen us in that category. And I'm hoping that it'll stay that way. But I have been tracking those trends and just trying to keep an eye on like, okay, how is this thing
Interesting.
evolving?
I feel like even if it did change, that it would revert back quickly. I feel like
Yeah,
a lot of what you've been doing in the AMP side of things is making sure that pages are just ridiculously fast,
totally.
and
Yeah.
I think AMP is still going to be a lot faster, even with some of these new core web vitals and other things that they're asking webmasters to pay attention to. I
Yeah.
think they're still going to be a little bit faster. So even if that that slower result starts to show up because it can now qualify to be in the newsfeed without the AMP, that users are going to click. They're going to wait a few seconds and be like, "Yeah, this is taking too long," and they're going to go back and they're going to choose LA Times, right? So I
Totally.
kind
And I
of feel
mean,
like that's
that's
what's
the
going to
hope.
happen. Yeah.
That's the hope. So we'll see. I would say like TBD on it. Because it's definitely a priority that I have and I know how those things can evolve. But as of now, I'm hoping that we're in the clear.
Very cool. So that's good. It always seemed like we all, freak out a little bit when there's an algorithm update or a change. Like, oh my God, what's going to happen? And I feel like the ones that complain the most about the updates are the ones that were doing things they probably shouldn't have, right?
Always, yeah,
So
I feel like that
I don't know.
is
Maybe
the
it's just me.
trend. Yeah. That's why,
Yep.
like, just in general and being in this sort of, position, so much of my role is, training and just working one-on-one with, our editors and our writers, and that's one of my favorite parts of my job is that I work with just everyone, in our giant newsroom, and I'm always trying to push those best practices to touch on what you were, speaking about, because that's what can prevent us from getting in trouble later is to know that, we're always on top of those.
Educated. Yep.
Yeah, and educating people about it.
hmm I find with some of the agency clients we've worked with, that's been the best success story for us is getting buy-in from the different teams
Yeah.
and giving them credit. So, hey, thanks for believing in this particular task and prioritizing it. Thanks to you, you helped um, prevent what would have been about 1.5 million in online revenue that we were getting, that would have went away had you not taken the time to take care of this. So you really saved the company over $12 million a year.
It's
Great
amazing.
job.
Yeah.
Right? Little things like that that could be part of what causes rank drops, and just getting them excited about search. Like, wow, I made a difference. I helped save money. I helped make money. Maybe I'll get a raise out of it or something. So I
Well,
think
I
I
love
think that buy-in is so
yeah.
important.
I love that you brought that up because another thing that I think goes so hand in hand with teaching and training, and it's something that I really integrated into my approach, is the positive feedback because I think that leads to buy in. A lot of the time, a big part of my job and the way I like to refer to it is like demystifying SEO. So making
Mhm.
it clear that, like, if we do, A, B, and C, we follow these best practices, this is the desired result. I found that when you can show that desired result back to that writer or editor and they see it, they'll get excited and they'll want to, duplicate that. They'll want to keep doing that in the future. So yeah, just like some of my, like people who have really taken off with these best practices at work, it's been so exciting to see them really, take on these best practices and believe in them. And yeah, just see those results that they really want. So I'm all about like the screenshots, showing for us in news SEO, it's all about the top stories carousel. So
Mhm.
anytime that, we get certain things in there that are especially very competitive, I am all about being that cheerleader who's like, look at this screenshot, this is amazing.
Look what we did together. Do you guys use like Microsoft Teams or Slack and keep
Oh,
those
we're
groups
all
going as well?
over Slack. We are all over Slack. I have like dreams about Slack. Yeah, it
And
never
so
stops.
many cool integrations too. I mean, I love it. I can do so much with it now.
Yeah,
But
it's kind
yeah,
of
so we do the same thing wherever we can, where we know our clients or our clients' developers in there. We try to avoid sharing those memes, with the SEO expert versus programmer, even though there's those moments where
yeah,
you get that kickback, and internally you'll share that and be like, all right, cool, we educated them. They agreed to take care of the task, but it was this huge battle to try to quantify and prove that what we're suggesting, could have a benefit to, bottom
totally.
line. And I think that's one of our challenges is SEOs in general is trying to prove that our suggestions have merit, and that's a bummer that
Yeah,
that more web developers and content writers don't have more of an interest in search, that they would want to have buy-in. They feel like this is their bubble. Anything beyond that is technical. If it's a marketer, or it's eccentric if they're a developer, right? So
yeah.
it's a really interesting paradigm, I think.
I mean, one other thing that I would bring up with that too, it's ever since I started working in SEO, I picked this up very quickly that a catchphrase in our industry is it depends. And that can be really
It's a
tricky
cliche.
when you're working with, in particular, working in news, like with writers and editors, because like these people are so talented and they love
Mhm.
like kind of exact, like, I know that I did this, so it's going to lead to this. And just on the topic of what you were saying, where you need to prove your worth, and I think continuously prove your worth, that's something that I've learned in being in this sort of role is always kind of managing expectations and letting my teams know, we're always just going to follow the best practices, like throw everything that we can at the wall, but SEO will never be a completely definitive thing because it's
We
just
don't
not
know.
like
Google
that.
doesn't tell you how they rank pages. They just give you hints and
They give
clues.
you hints, and
Yeah.
that's how I always explain it in my trainings is, like, I want you guys to know everything that I know. I want us to do everything that we can, but there will always be an element of mystery to it, and
Mhm.
that's why I always encourage our teams and, even give myself this pep talk that if an individual story doesn't take off, especially in the world of news SEO, it's definitely different from traditional kind of e-commerce SEO in that way because I worked in an agency. That was kind of where I got my foundation in SEO.
Right.
Back then, it was you were dealing with far less content. I mean, we have so much content that goes through in a single day. And so something I remind myself and my teams about is that if we have a story that doesn't take off, there will always be another one like pushing up right behind it.
Right
So
behind it. Yep.
yeah, it's important to just like keep those realistic expectations and know that like we will have another shot. Probably like someone's already saying, where is it? Like I need to get this up. So yeah, it's just important to like manage those expectations and give it everything we got, but keep our heads on straight at the same time.
Yep, exactly. And speaking of when there is a story or news story, you've um, in the news, you're probably focusing a lot on current trending events, right?
Yeah,
Of
yeah.
what's going on. Can you share a bit about the role of maybe Google Trends and how it plays in your world, how it works, how you use it, and
Yeah.
maybe about how you go to set up a SEO action plan for each day with that in mind?
Yeah, I love this because I am a nerd for Google Trends. I even tell my friends who don't work in SEO or anywhere related to this to use Google Trends, because what I love about it is how objective it is, that it's giving
Mhm.
you that in the moment, this is what people care the most about.
Yep.
So, in terms of coming up with a workflow off of it, I mean, first thing every single morning, and my work hours always scare people, but yeah, like I basically start at, like 5:15 in the morning. And, that may sound really early out here, but when you think about it, we're, competing with a lot of publishers on the East Coast.
Yep.
So Washington Post, New York Times, and other, related publishers, they've already been up and at it. So if we're, logging on at 5, we're catching up on some of the trends that are already popping over there. And that's
Hmm.
where Google Trends is really invaluable because it'll start to show me, okay, these are the things that are already percolating. That's where I'll start to check from like the night before. Okay, did we post on any of these things? Are we behind? Is there anything that we can jump on right now? I'll also start to look into, like our wire services, because we work with like AP News. And so if there is a quicker wire, piece of content that we can get up to jump on a trend, we'll do that, because it will take more time, obviously, that early to get, one of our own writers to do something. So it's a matter of kind of filtering through those things, finding where it's appropriate to jump on some trends, and then really laying out a workflow. Because I'll give you a good example. The Olympics have been a huge theme for us.
Yeah.
They've just
It's
taken over
everywhere.
then the whole news cycle. And so every single day when you're in a specific event cycle like that, Google Trends is also really helpful because in that top stories section of Google Trends, those Olympics themes will shine through. So
Mhm.
in particular, a big one that I've taken in the last few days has obviously been Simone Biles. She's been a major topic of interest. So every single day, I'm always trying to dig in there and see, okay, how can we better cover this particular theme? What are breakout angles? So that's kind of going beyond just like the simple news, but trying to find these like explainer angles and different, specific queries that people might be searching for.
Right.
One that I came up with today that came directly from Google Trends, was, what are twisties? Simone Biles referred to that as, something that impacted her when she was in that vault. So
Mhm.
now, we're pursuing an explainer on that to, like hopefully debunk that for our readers. So Google
Mhm.
Trends, both in that like real time queries feed, where it's basically just giving you the stories, but also on an event like the Olympics, just doing an individual search, like using the search bar, and then looking at the rising queries. That's extremely helpful for a workflow because I can take those things and I can go to our sports team and I can pitch, these ideas, and then we can get kind of our juices flowing, and start to roll out a sort of, just lineup of things that we want to pursue for the day. And I check Google Trends all day. That never really ends. I mean, I do that very first thing in the morning to, we have like a 7:30 call, with all of our lead editors where we kind of create that workflow for everyone for the day and set priorities. So it really plays into coming up with the roadmap for that. But I'm checking it all day, just throughout the day because I want to see, okay, how are the Olympics evolving now? What are other breakout topics? Something that I love about it is it can change in like 5 minutes. So you really want to look in there
It's
and,
yeah, it's pretty real time. And then you share that with the different writers, or what's
I
that
do.
process
Yeah.
look like with
I
you?
have, I love working across all of our, departments, like I mentioned earlier. So, I'm definitely just going back to Slack. Slack is our preferred method, but it's always just like ping ponging ideas, either, directly. And like we have department channels that we use or just
Right.
on a one on one basis in Slack. But I'm in constant contact with so many people I couldn't even name, across all of our sections just to, ensure that they know. And the way I always, try to look at it is that it's never like demanding something. I mostly just want to flag things and make people aware. And then we can kind of collaborate and figure out, like, in terms of bandwidth and, the like kind of other priorities that might be in the mix. Is this a possibility? Is it not? But my objective is just to always make people aware so that they know. Yeah, but I love Google Trends. It's been so beneficial in like all of the different news SEO jobs that I've had because of that real time aspect. It's
Yeah,
just
what's what's
invaluable.
happening? Yeah, it's what's happening right now. It's
Yeah.
amazing. You're really at the core
I mean,
of
one of
what people are searching at this moment, which is it's amazing. If you're in news and you're
yeah.
not using Google Trends, you're doing something wrong. Right.
Totally. I mean, I love a lot of other keyword tools because, like, in particular, when I was at my agency, I remember, working with SEMrush and just like a lot of other tools. And those can be really helpful for like evergreen keyword research. But I've just found that, like, when you're in the moment and you're in like a breaking news scenario, something that just happened an hour ago,
Hmm.
Google Trends is just incredibly helpful because it's going to give you that real time information. And one other thing that I would mention that's really cool about Google Trends is when they create the modules that are on the homepage. So they have one up right now for the Olympics, which is pretty cool. But they'll do that for a wide variety of events. So that'll be like anything from the Super Bowl to all of the award shows and everything in between. And if you look in those, Google gets really nerdy. So for anybody who wants to get really nerdy, it'll break down like specific queries that people are, searching for. I love that it really gets into questions because questions are very search friendly. So it'll
Oh yeah,
kind of break down
great
like,
upper funnel content for sure. Yeah.
yeah. So that's always really helpful too. I'm always checking that.
I love that. Yeah, the Google Trends seems amazing.
I love
You know,
it.
we recently covered newsjacking on a podcast, and for our listeners, newsjacking basically means aligning a brand with a current event and looking, to generate media attention and boost within the brand's reach. What's your take on newsjacking for businesses? Is it a good idea? Are there better ways to do it?
Yeah. So, just in thinking about that term, the term kind of makes me giggle, but I do see where that's coming from. And I think if I wasn't working at like a traditional sort of news site, because obviously we just have like endless opportunities that come up working in
Yeah.
news. What I think of when I hear newsjacking is more of like the seasonal opportunities and how you could tap into those. So if I was at more of like a traditional e-commerce site, that's where I think of like the recurring themes that are going to come around that you should be aware of. So, I mean, I was actually just working on an article earlier today where it was around like summer vacations. But
Mhm.
if it was around this time of year, that is a part of the news cycle right now is like everything related to summer.
Yep.
And if you want to take that one step further and make it even more newsy, where it's not just kind of evergreen and it's the summer, how about heat wave? How about if you have a product that could somehow help with, the heat wave in some way, connecting that is a major news theme right now. You might not necessarily be a news company that's reporting on it, but there's some way that you could create a piece of content that people need because people desperately want to find ways to cope with this heat across the US right now.
Sure.
So that would just, yeah,
We have a client named Quiet Cool, and they manufacture a whole house fan.
love it.
Cut
Yeah.
your electricity down, you open some windows, and it just sucks all the hot air right out. But yeah, so they'd be perfect for something like that. So if you're a business and you want to take advantage of that angle, is that when you would enlist a PR person who jumps into decision and does some outreach, or do you just post a post up on your website in an RSS feed and kind of socialize it through your normal social channels? What do you think might be a best practice for a business that wants to take advantage of that?
Yeah, so I think it would involve a few different things because I would be curious if that business is in Google News at all because I mean that could play into it with how much like play that they would
They probably
necessarily
wouldn't have been when it was AMP required, but now that it's
yeah.
not, they
Yeah,
might actually have a
exactly,
chance.
exactly.
Yeah,
Because I mean, that's gonna benefit them is if they're in Google News, because that will give them a little bit more sway with a topic like that.
right.
So I would say that that's one element of it, but apart from that, yeah, I absolutely agree with, like, the social media approach, just creating that piece of content that's very relevant and then blasting it out on social media, just making sure that it gets that extra promotion. I like the idea of adding in the PR person who could, amp it up even further.
Right.
But I would say, like, just I can think of so many different examples like the heat wave, just different, news cycles that kind of cycle through. But tapping into those more like evergreen themes. Another thing that I could think of too would be like if we're in a city like Los Angeles, where there are so many different kinds of like eateries and restaurants, there's a lot of different evergreen opportunities there too. So really look at the location that you're at and think of like, what do people care about here? Another thing that came up recently at work was like, local beaches. I mean, we're in the summer. So if you have something that could relate to the beach and it's summer, then that's, I mean, that is essentially newsjacking because, there's been buzz around that, enhanced buzz this entire summer. So I think it's always just a matter of like staying on top of Google Trends and seeing in there any sort of like evergreen themes, extract those, and then think, how can I relate that theme to my business or my product that I have? So it wouldn't be as much of a direct transfer as it is in news, where it's just like, I'm going to report on it, but try to connect that to the product and make that useful to the reader,
And what's
especially if there's
amazing
an
for
issue to be
businesses,
solved.
yep. I was gonna say what's amazing for businesses in doing this news thing is you don't have to wait 6 months for your page to show up.
Absolutely.
You
Yeah.
do that news post, you're right there in the carousel at the top, and you're going to be seen right away. And
Yeah.
of course, there's Discover and all sorts of other ways that Google might share that content.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think like, Google Trends, it can be a huge help with that. Just make sure that you're monitoring it regularly. In particular, those modules will probably be helpful because if you look at those and you see those very user friendly questions, if you have a product that can essentially answer that question and
Yeah,
provide a solution, that's going to be golden. Yeah.
I love
So
it.
just say to, monitor that closely.
Speaking of ranking quickly in the news, that's like your job is to make sure that our pages rank as fast as possible. When you're editing and you're optimizing these articles handed over by the writers, you're honing in on specific SEO focal points. Like headlines,
Yeah.
H1s, titles, meta descriptions, URLs,
Yeah.
internal linking. What might be kind of a high level best process for any business to use to quickly get rankings in Google, specifically in the news section?
Yeah. So, I mean, by and large, whether you're looking at like,
High level, you don't have to give away secret sauce.
yeah, yeah, no, no, totally, totally. No, I feel very comfortable sharing this because I think like anyone
Awesome.
should know this if they want to tap into news. But what I found working at the variety of places I've been at, is that Google and Google News and just within traditional Google search, for news related things is really pushing just that keyword driven headline. I mean, that's what they want to see. And really, when I look at my day to day work, so much of it, and I love it because I've been an English nerd my entire life, but a lot of it is wordplay. It's okay, I know that I have this story. I usually make like a list of, okay, these are the must have keywords. And then it's just a matter of like shifting them around into the most, kind of cohesive sentence or headline.
Mhm.
And that's really the biggest, like I would just say above everything else, is making sure that you're not missing an important keyword, that it's very short and concise, because that's another thing that Google is really looking for.
Right.
Ideally, 60 characters or under if you want to prevent that headline, from getting cut off in Google search
Getting
results.
truncated, right?
Yeah. So you want to be careful about that. And that's something that I'm pushing all the time. Is that we want to be short and concise and keyword targeted. That is, sometimes very difficult because we deal with some themes that aren't as like quick and simple. They'll be more nuanced, but that's part of the challenge, is trying to really extract those keywords, entities, queries, that people would type into Google. Because another piece of advice that I give in all of my trainings is that,
Mhm.
you want to simplify the process as much as possible and not go beyond that. Because another thing, when I'm coming up with these headlines, you can always eliminate conversational words, things like here are the, that's really nice. It's like it's very, conversational, but would someone type that into Google? No. So most of the time, if I need to cut something like that, an
Conversational.
adjective, if I
Mhm.
need to cut something, even though I love adjectives and I can definitely, my own kind of personal writing style, I'm all about that. But when it comes to that short character count, if you're really getting down to it, that's something that could be cut. So I'm always bringing myself back to what are the specific things that someone would type into Google. I think that's what we all do as SEOs, right? Is to just take it back to that and not overcomplicate it. And that's all the more important in news because it's so highly competitive to get in that top stories carousel. Something else that I would point out that kind of makes news different from, just other sorts of like
SEO.
SEO, strategies is that, I mean, it's really top stories or bust, because most people are going to look in there when they're searching for something. And yeah, you might, fall underneath that and be on the first page, but really the best real estate is in that top stories carousel. And what I found, just overall tracking the trends in these different jobs that I've had is that if you really push that keyword driven strategy in your headline, that comes first. But after that, something else that I would say is like make sure you're really utilizing internal linking, because and obviously the other sections are important too, like meta descriptions and
Yeah.
URLs and things like
If it's
that.
if it's a big article, you get that link from the homepage right away, right? That's the
Yeah,
trick, the hack. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, the only reason I bring up internal linking in particular is that just as a case study with the LA Times, we cover a lot of recurring themes where we want to be an authority on that. So that might be like LA homelessness, or that might be Garcetti or Newsom, these themes that we're continuously funneling into, right, within our content. So we really want to make sure that in these articles, when we're feeding into that further, that we're
Mhm.
making it clear to Google, this is not our first rodeo. We have been covering this very consistently. Look at this narrative that we're mapping for you that proves that we
I
know what
noticed
we're
that,
talking
yeah,
about.
related articles in the, within
Yeah.
the context.
So
Uh-huh.
that's always really important, and I think that that could play into any business really. I mean, if you've created content around something, you
Mhm.
you want to make that clear that like within your content here, these are the other times that we've covered this. We know what we're talking about. We're an authority that you can trust. I think that would play in the same way no matter what your business is. So always
Yeah.
make sure that you're aware of that related content and actively promoting that too. And then yeah, I mean, I would say within the URL and in the meta description and also alt text and things like that, other elements, just driving home, kind of that bigger keyword theme of, just not missing any of those sorts of entities that people would be searching for. So I would say by and large, that's the thing that's filtering through my head on a daily basis is how can we push those central keywords.
Despite Google saying it's not, is the meta description a ranking signal?
So this, oh man, this question.
It's uh,
Meta descriptions are all over the place, just
okay.
to be transparent about it. Like I've noticed just in tracking that more closely, that, at least for us, Google can be kind of hit or miss with pulling in our meta description correctly from our
Mhm.
CMS. So
Versus a
that
snippet.
yeah, so instead of taking the one that we've, created and we've curated, Google will just pull in something random from the content anyways, which doesn't give me the best like vibe towards that. I mean,
Yeah.
I still do like to believe that it contributes some value. I get the sense that it's been kind of diminishing in value, but I like to believe that it's still something that is noticed because for us, I would say it's almost like half and half that Google will pull it in correctly sometimes and then not do it other times. One of those
Mhm.
mysteries of Google. So I would say I'm kind of undecided, but I still believe that there is some value there. But Google
Yeah.
has been very wonky. That's something that I've been tracking pretty closely. And I do get those questions from our writers and editors because they'll say, like, I wrote this, fabulous meta description. It's not popping up on the Google search results page. And my response usually is just like, that's Google being funky, and there's not really a solution for it at this point.
It's
But
funny
I've
how
noticed
a
that happening
robot will
here.
help determine whether or not the description is descriptive enough of the content, right? That's so funny. It's like,
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
robot? And I get it. Sales pages are written to have really salesy descriptions, and then you don't see any of that language on the page itself. Or worse, you decide to take the first few sentences from the first paragraph and use that as your meta description, and you wonder why they're choosing a snippet. So
Totally.
it's
Yeah, I mean
interesting.
Google's weird in that way. It definitely is, and that's one of those mysteries that I also track, where I just want to know like, huh, I wonder what's going on there. So we'll see. Maybe in a year it'll be different. Maybe it'll completely drop off in a year. But until it's completely gone, I feel like it plays some role in it.
Yep.
So I always tell our writers and editors to fill out that element and make sure that it's in there.
I love it. I'm looking through our questions. We've actually answered them in some of the conversations we've had already. I only have
Awesome.
really two more for you, really quick ones.
Sure.
First one is, what steps do you take to maximize social media shareability of the content your team puts out in the world? Do you incorporate a hashtag and similar research as part of your overall SEO research?
Yeah. So what's cool about my work at the LA Times is that I'm on our audience team. So, I work very closely with our audience editors, and those could also, just be known as like our social media editors. And we have, embedded editors who are with
Mhm.
each of our sections. So that would be with sections like our metro section and our
Sure.
entertainment section. But we also have, what we would call kind of like core social media editors who are in charge of like our main social accounts. So that's like our Facebook, our Twitter, our Instagram. So it really helps me a lot in my role to stay very focused on SEO and the content and all of these elements that we were just discussing,
Right.
because I have them and they're incredible colleagues to have who can, whenever I like finish an SEO edit on a story, I can flip it over to them and then they're going to take, that same story and make sure that it has the right social headline. Because a big thing that I push in all of our trainings is that, yes, with SEO headlines, we have to be very short, concise. We have that character count
Keyword rich.
limit.
Yep.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But on social, we can have a very different vibe. We have a little bit more wiggle room character count wise. That's
Yep.
where I like to say that we can, get a little bit more like emotional. We can be more teasy there. Because another thing within my world of news SEO is that you basically want to give it all away. That's what you want to do because that's what people are searching for.
Mhm.
But if I ever have a writer or an editor who's like, oh, but I don't want to give it all away, I'll tell them, like, we can do that on social. Like, we can create something teasy on social. We can have a different approach there. So, a big part of my work, and that's why I love working with the other members of my audience team, is collaborating on, these different stories and making sure that they can have these different shades within them. So on search, we're being extremely targeted. We're hitting all the right entities, but maybe we're going to take a more,
Feel more playful on
yeah,
social.
much
Yeah, I
more
love it.
playful, much more teasy, So that's one of my favorite parts of my job is just getting to collaborate with our other audience editors, and everyone in my department to, kind of tap into because I hate it. Sometimes like news SEO, I feel like with the headlines I can create, it can come off as like more boring because it has to be so keyword driven. I'm always trying to find ways around that if I can, but it can come off that way. So I feel like the social side of things is always a nice like place to, kind of put that energy. It's like, oh no, but it's not completely gone. We can go put it over there.
I love it.
So I'm
So
always
there's
working on
definitely a
that.
collaboration point there then. You finish the piece and then you pass the baton over and then
Yeah.
they'll do some of the hashtag research or you provide the hashtags for them.
So another thing that's interesting is that I would say there's a good amount of crossover between,
Okay.
a big part of my job, especially if it's on like a breaking news sort of scenario, is finding what is that top keyword. So say if it had been like a shooting or something like that, making sure that, this is the top way that people are searching for this. It's really important to use Google Trends. That's where I really, really rely on Google Trends to see, okay, this is the top way people are referring to it. And that's where there can be like direct crossover between social and SEO because oftentimes the way that people are searching for it is something
Yep.
that they would want to transfer into their social media posts and make sure that they're
Love it.
targeting it in the same way. That user behavior can kind of mesh like quite often. So that's definitely one way that we collaborate on that front is that
Super
like have
streamlined too. Just keep it
yeah,
simple and one carries over to the other. I love it.
and using Slack, just to go back to Slack. So that's where it's really important to be in the different channels and be forwarding that keyword information around because there will be that crossover. So just in trying to be as effective as possible, like I feel like there's a good amount of, just crossover between our two different objectives that we have in that way.
It's
Yeah. So I
amazing.
mean, in that way, my SEO research really does play into that because there will oftentimes be that common ground there.
All right, last question, then we got a quick lightning round. We'd
Yeah.
love to hear a little bit more about your mantra mentioned in an article we found. Interrupt anxiety with gratitude. Can you explain what you mean by that and how you put that into practice?
Sure, sure. So, I mean, you've probably picked up on it just in hearing about everything that news SEO is today, but it can be a highly stressful environment, working in news, I have a huge passion for this. I've, loved news for as long as I can remember. It goes back for me to like sneaking People magazine into my mom's shopping cart when I was like 3. I've loved this my entire life. And I think that that genuine passion really helps people in this industry. If you have that, then it's easier to get through, some of the highs and lows of it. But I first came up with that. A friend told me that, and it just really spoke to me because there is a lot of, room for anxiety within this
Mm.
industry, just with
Do
like
you think? I can't even
there's
imagine. I don't know how you do it. It's amazing.
yeah. Yeah, there is just like there's always going to be a lack of stability in certain ways because media is constantly shifting. I think we're also dealing with, still the transition from like print media over to digital media and kind
Yep.
of this like in between that we're in. I mean, especially I can speak on that working at kind of like a legacy newspaper institution. There's always going to be growing pains with that. But that's just one of the things that can definitely like feed into some anxiety. And I actually love this that we talk about mental health like a good amount at work, just making sure that it's a priority, that we're putting at kind of the top of our minds.
Yep.
That it's something
Especially now.
you need to actively think about it and know that you're not wrong or flawed to feel certain issues like kind of coming into your life. And so the interrupting anxiety with gratitude, I love that mantra because what it does is, for me at least, when I'm having like an anxious moment, because those will inevitably come up, it forces me to stop, pause, breathe, and just kind of take myself out of the individual situation and think about the bigger picture. So usually what I'll do is, I'll do that, I'll stop and I'll breathe and just try to separate from it. And then it really helps to, plug in something that you can be grateful for that day. This in
Love it.
particular really, really helped in the madness that was 2020 because there were
Yeah.
so many different things to be stressed out about or anxious about between like COVID. I mean, I'm a hypochondriac, so it was a crazy year. And then the election and just everything else that happened. And I found that this really simple practice of just like stop,
Mhm.
breathe, and then insert something else that can create positive energy as opposed to that anxious energy. It was just super effective. And it's something I use on a
Brilliant.
very regular basis because I feel like that power of positive thought. I mean, obviously, like those anxious thoughts will creep back in, but I find that whenever they do, using that sort of like, role reversal, it's like I'm not going to think about the
Mindset. I
anxiety.
love
Yeah,
it.
it's a mind trick.
Yeah.
It's a mind trick, but it really, and there's always something to be grateful for. It's totally cheesy. But I found that like even, when we were at the absolute peak of the COVID pandemic, it just made me all the more grateful for my family and for, my health. And it really put life into perspective. So I'm always
So
trying to
when
find,
anxious later today, I will be grateful that I have an amazing friend that works for the LA Times.
oh, thank you.
That
Yes,
would be
I'm so
super
grateful
cool.
for you, Steve.
I know you gotta go. I gotta be conscious of your time, but really quick lightning
Sure.
round. What are your favorite SEO tools?
Oh, I mean, you've really covered my favorite
Google
that I use
Trends,
all the time. I mean, I love Google Trends. I love SEMrush. I use
SEMrush.
SEMrush, excuse me. I love it.
I got
Sorry, it's
corrected
always
already.
that classic thing. I've had
I
different
always
people
call
refer
it
to
SEMrush.
it.
Uh,
I love SEMrush. In terms of other resources, I really like Moz and like they helped me a lot just in the
okay.
early stage of my career, just in getting kind of fundamentals down.
Same
So I
here.
love
Mhm,
that. I love industry blogs, like Search Engine Land and, staying on
mhm,
top of those things. I think that's really important in our industry. But I mean, there's so many other tools out there. We have like other things that I've considered, kind of implementing at the LA Times.
mhm.
But yeah, I mean, I would say that those are kind of my core ones. I mean, Google Trends really fuels a lot of what I do. So if I had to use like pick one that I use on a very, very regular basis, that would be it.
That's the one. Who should we be following in SEO if we want to? Aside from you, of course, but who else in the news side of SEO? Who should we be following if we want to kind of piggyback off of what other experts are sharing and what they're doing?
Sure. I'll name three that I really like just with the different things that they share in their experience.
Okay.
Lily Ray in our industry, I just
Yep.
saw her at our conference and I thought she was
Uh,
introducing some really interesting things about EAT and how that can relate to news. So I really love her. John
Expertise, authority, trust. Yep.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah. So I really love what she's doing, and I'm definitely a big fan there. John Shahada is another one that I
Mhm.
really like. He and I have been like kind of in close contact. He created a very cool tool, and he's been really evolving a lot of interesting ideas around how we can better track Google News and just kind of the mysterious science behind news SEO and what we do. So I would definitely
Okay.
recommend John Shahada. He's another one, and then one other, just kind of news SEO person who's shifted into product, but I think she still has some really interesting things to say would be Upasna Gautam. She's amazing. And she's always very active on social media and shares just a lot of great resources. She is at CNN now, but she was previously working in news SEO. And so I would definitely recommend Upasna Gautam as well.
Sweet. So if people want to follow you, what is your social media handle?
Sure. So mine is just Louisa Frahm on Twitter, and then it's Miz Louisa 720 on Instagram. But I would, yeah, I'd love to stay in touch and just
720.
Louisa Frahm on LinkedIn.
We'll have to talk about the 720 later and figure out where that stems from.
It stems from my birthday. My birthday just passed. It's July
That's
20th.
right. Yep. 31. That's amazing.
Yes.
Don't look a day
Yes.
over 21. Well,
Well,
Louisa, this has been
thank you.
amazing. Again, I want to be conscious of your time and thank you for giving so much great advice and had a
Sure.
lot of fun talking about news SEO. I think after this big rollout page update finishes, maybe we can do another short one just to kind of discuss what we felt the changes were once the dust settles. That might be some fun thing to do. And
Absolutely.
um, if you guys are doing who are listening, you're doing any sort of news SEO, please follow Louisa on social. You'll learn so much, and she's so willing to share and give
Totally.
give you one other person to be grateful for.
Oh,
Well, thank you so much, Louisa, and thank you guys for listening again, and we'll see you all in the next episode.
sounds good. Thank you, Steve. Have a good day.